What's up,
How's it
my
going?
friend? Good, man. How are you?
It's working my way through the week, ready for some time off.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
nice.
got a spring break trip planned this week and a speaking engagement trip next week.
Where are you speaking at next week?
I'm going to be at Security B-Sides Milwaukee. So I believe this is the second annual B-Sides Milwaukee.
Okay.
So I'm going to be there on Wednesday. Uh, I've got to talk 10 things I wish I knew before I started my own company.
Oh, that's
And
right. I remember we were having this conversation like probably 2 months ago.
yeah, yeah. Don't tell anybody. We'll see whether anybody's actually listening to this or not. But I've not finished my deck for this yet. I've got the outline done, but the
There you
deck
go.
itself is not done. That said, like I feel like this is kind of one of those this is one of those talks where I could probably just riff it for 45 minutes if I needed to, and that may be kind of how this goes. But yeah, so I've got that talk on Wednesday, and then Thursday and Friday I'm going to be at CypherCon in Milwaukee, which free plug for CypherCon. It is Wisconsin's largest cybersecurity conference. So
Oh,
I
cool.
spoke at it last year. Last year was my first year. So actually last year when I went to Milwaukee for CypherCon, I spoke at it. It was my first time ever being in Milwaukee,
Oh, really?
which is wild because I only live 2.5 hours away. And
Yeah.
I've never, like, Chicago's usually it. I get up to Chicago and I'm done. But I went to Milwaukee last year, spoke at this conference, had a great time. Can't wait to be back.
I know you guys like to go to Milwaukee. We like to go to Milwaukee. We're not too far from there. I think we're about 315, maybe 330. So we're not too far either.
You could go hit up the Milwaukee Mile for the IndyCar race this year.
Yeah, that's not too far away.
It's I think it's if I remember correctly, like August 24th. Uh I went last year to one of the days. Last year was they had it on
Yeah.
Saturday and Sunday. This year I believe it's just Sunday. Uh, but I should be going back this year. And then hopefully I'll be going to the race in St. Louis again this year. The
Gateway.
uh, yeah, I don't think it's Gateway anymore. I think it's like Worldwide Technology
Oh, yeah.
Raceway.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's WWC. It's not the
yeah. For
Auto Group Gateway, whatever it was.
I think it may still be the Bommarito 500 or
Okay.
Bommarito 300 or something. I think Bommarito still may have the naming rights to the race
Okay.
itself, but not the track.
All right.
Um, and then as we were discussing before we went on the air, I just got my tickets for the Indy 500.
Very cool. Okay, so where are you
I
going to be at on the track location?
I'm going to be right at the end of turn 4 in
Okay.
section H. So it's right before the paddock section.
Yeah.
No shade. The shaded sections sell out pretty quick. So I'm going to be
Right.
either getting pounded by the sun or the rain, depending on how things shake out in May. But yeah, so I'm right after turn 4. I'll get to see all the cars coming out of turn 4 and head right down to the checkered flag. And I'm right in
Yeah,
front
and
of
you
it.
don't have
You
to
can
watch them. You don't have to watch them do the crazy snake down in where they were going down and almost hitting the what was it?
the
The
pit.
attenuator? What was that they were?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was that separator between
Yeah.
pit lane and
Right.
the straight. Yeah, and Newgarden and Erickson a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Newgarden was all over the place, and yeah, he almost clipped it. I don't think that they let him do that anymore.
They don't.
Like I
That's what I
said,
was saying. Yeah. It's done now. They don't let it. It looks so dangerous to watch it, right? It was just
Feeling stuck in your career? Like you're not reaching your full potential? At Greenbox U, we help you unlock the hidden potential within your career journey. Our Digital Foundations for Success course, combined with personalized coaching, equips you with the tools and strategies to discover, monetize, and apply your unique skills, knowledge, and experiences. Don't just meet expectations, exceed them.
it's interesting when you look at the series right now because of the ownership and the ownership of that track. And I'm a huge Penske person, by the way, so let me just qualify it. But I look at
Okay.
it and I'm like, what if the Steinbrenner family that owned the Yankees owned Major League Baseball?
Right.
And you're starting to see certain things happen where it just calls into questions. I just think that, but let's also be honest, if he wouldn't have bought the series, I'm not sure what happens to the series if he doesn't buy it, right?
Right. And the same thing with
It's
the
a
track.
catch 22.
I mean, really, there was a long time where without the Indy 500, well, I mean, Indianapolis Motor Speedway wouldn't still be around,
Right.
and the IndyCar series probably wouldn't still be around. So,
No.
yeah, I mean, Penske's money has without question, saved that series, and
Mm-hmm.
they were able to breathe new life into it, because it was close to dead at one point, actually more than one point.
Yeah. So you know what's interesting? I was just having this conversation with somebody actually earlier today, and we were talking. We'd both been in the technology industry for multiple decades and seeing kind of the rise and fall, and sometimes the rise again of a technology company. And certain companies come to mind. I mean, an easy one that targets Apple. If
Yeah.
you're a millennial or Gen Z, you probably look at Apple and think the dominance, iPhone, maybe iPod, iPad, all this stuff, right? But if you I go back far enough, I can remember when they hit the marketplace really the first time, and it was in the 70s, and I was a kid in elementary school, and we had one Apple II computer, 2E computer that was being moved around, or whatever the model was. I think it was an Apple II. It wasn't the Apple I, it was Apple II. On a cart, the entire school building shared the one computer with a
Mhm.
one dot matrix printer. And their dominance in the educational system was interesting enough. That's a whole nother podcast topic, because I had personal experience with all that in the 90s when Apple was going through kind of the worst time for them. But kind of the rise and then the fall and then the rise again of Apple. I think a lot of people, just depending on where you're at generationally, might not remember that there was a massive rise and a massive collapse to the point where what Microsoft have to loan them, basically that infused like 150 million bucks in them.
Yeah.
Or something like that to just kind of keep it going. I don't know if you remember this. Do you remember Mac clones? Do you remember when they cloned the Mac and they were selling
No.
these? Yeah. So it was 94, 95, 96, somewhere in that time frame. They licensed out the Mac OS, which seems just so sacrilegious today to even think they would even consider doing this, right? Of how protective all that is. But they actually license out the operating system in very much the same fashion that worked for IBM compatible PCs, where the Microsoft operating system was moving between Compaqs and IBMs and different manufacturers, right? It wasn't specific to a platform. They were in such bad shape, they licensed out the Mac OS to a company called Umax. And Umax was making, I think there might have been several, but that was one of them. They were making hardware that would run the Mac operating system on top of it. And you could run a Macintosh experience on a non-Apple piece of hardware.
Wow.
Yes.
That's
And
a
then I remember,
different reality.
very different. And then I also remember going into a school building and I was doing some substitute teaching at, and I walked up to this Mac and it was running Windows on it.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to figure out, at the time, I didn't have any business experience. So I was just trying to understand, because I remember I'd watched them go through the peak, their pinnacle of existence, and then this downfall. It was crazy. And the economics at the time were such that I was in college, and to buy a Mac, you couldn't go into Best Buy at this point in time and buy a Mac. You could only buy a Mac through certain places, right? And if you were like on a college campus, we had a place where, the bookstore, whatever it was, the Union sold them. And the price point on the cheapest Mac I could buy at the time, I think it was like $2,500. The reason I went to, and I use Macs all the time in the lab, the reason I went to a Windows machine is because I could pick up a Windows machine for like $1,200.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, here's my entry point. I can afford this entry point. I can't afford the other one. And then I just kind of watched the Mac experience just go down the tubes. I mean, it was bad. It was like
Yeah.
they had all kinds of interesting technology that just failed. Do you remember the Newton?
Yeah.
They had a little handheld device.
Yeah.
This is mid 90s, right? You could write on it
Mhm.
with a little stylus. You could write on the little LCD screen and it would interpret the handwriting.
Yeah. It was their version of the Palm Pilot.
It was way before the Palm Pilot, though.
Yeah.
Got so popular. This Newton thing. I remember I knew somebody, I think they had a cellular component on it that you could connect it to the net. I mean, you could run, it had a connection on it. I mean,
Mhm.
it was really advanced, but these guys had, like, it just did not work. None of it
Yeah.
worked. Nothing worked. You're like, this is crazy, that we're at this point. I just remember it's like, how did we go in like really like 15 years? Well, at that point, so let's call that 96.
Mhm.
12 years earlier is when they launched the Mac Classic at the Super Bowl
Yeah.
commercial. The infamous 1984, we're throwing the whole commercial that launched. I remember watching that Super Bowl as a kid, but I remember that commercial too. And in 12 years it went there. So think about modern day. What's an equivalent to what we're seeing right now? Or what's the equivalent of what we could be seeing?
Well, Apple just kind of got into a similar situation with Apple Intelligence, where they launched Apple Intelligence, with on the new iPhone 16s, and
Yeah.
then I believe they advertised it for a lot of the new like iPads and things like that, and it doesn't do what they said it would do, and now they're facing a possible class action lawsuit for it. So very similar to the Newton experience, it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I think they were not in a dominant position when they launched the Newton. I think they were trying to innovate and try to climb out of a hole. This is interesting because now you're seeing another kind of classic set of mistakes or problems, right? Where you're like this incumbent, you've fortified yourself with really like one of two realistic options for mobile phones, right? Your
Yeah, yeah.
iPhone, and now you've taken something as important as, or at least as notable as artificial intelligence, and try to integrate it into it. And apparently, you're having problems with it. And what does that mean? And what does that mean in your market share and your dominance and all that stuff? I think that's interesting. But I look at companies like remember it wasn't that long ago, really, that Intel was. We've talked about Intel before with like the whole Pentium chip situation.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the dominant position Intel was in from a CPU perspective and how much market share they had and market cap? And now look at them. And I remember AMD, and now look at where AMD's at. Look at the landscape and how it changes. And you would have never
Yeah.
thought 25 years ago that Intel could have ever been threatened in any way. I mean, they just controlled, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, same thing with like BlackBerry. Think about
Yes.
where BlackBerry was 2
Oh,
decades ago.
that they
It,
rode that up and down fast. I mean, seemingly.
very fast. I mean, there was a point in time where if you had a work phone,
Mhm.
it was a BlackBerry, no
Oh
question.
yeah.
Had
Yeah.
to be.
Yeah.
If you tried the only other if you had any other phone and you're utilizing it as a work phone, it was just to make and take calls.
I had a Palm OS phone, but I worked for Sprint at the day, so the different handsets will get promoted. But it was Palm. It was CrackBerry or Palm, maybe with some market share, but the BlackBerry or
Yeah,
CrackBerry at the time was such a big thing, right?
it was. Yeah, I had a BlackBerry Pearl
Mm-hmm.
was the one that I had, and I mean, it was a great little phone. I liked
Yeah.
it a lot. And then, you know, the iPhone with touchscreen technology came around, and you had a bigger screen, you had better resolution, you could watch video, and the operating system was a lot faster and a lot smoother.
Well, see, the one that always perplexes me is the Microsoft
Microsoft
situation.
phone or the Windows phone?
Well, all of them. I remember going from even like the Palm Pilot competitor Windows CE operating
Mm,
system. And you're like, this is so familiar because we're all sitting here working with this operating system all day. that it never successfully translated into that mobile device, even in the early 2000s. And then even every iteration of every attempt that they ever made to run any kind of Windows version on any kind of phone, it didn't matter that Outlook looked like Outlook and, all of it looked the same. It just
Yeah.
never seemed to work.
I wonder why that is. You have any speculations?
Well, I think one of the factors might be that I think it doesn't seem as novel. If your average worker is sitting on a Windows machine all day long working, you would think there's an inherent advantage then of selling a product where it's a similar experience with the aesthetics and everything maps over. But maybe it's one of those things that it's too familiar, that the novelty of something else is what people are actually looking for. And so maybe that's the what they were looking for is the entertainment form factor and experience of a iPod morphs into an iPhone.
Right.
And then it's similar to an iPad, right? There may be maybe. Have you ever heard of that guy named Loewy? I think it's Loewy. He has this thing called the Maya principle. Have you heard of this?
Mm-mm. No.
It's very interesting. This guy was I'm trying to think. He's a very creative person, and he created designs and like logos for companies, and just some really interesting things, all the way from um, like the shell. We're racing guys, so when we look at that shell, the famous shell logo, he designed that shell logo, but he designed it way back in the 60s or something. So they only keep slightly modifying it. They never fully replace it. Have you noticed this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
a lot of iconic logos are that way.
yeah, he was so good at design and new innovation around design concepts that like all these major companies, Exxon with like the double X in the logo, that was all
Mhm.
him. This guy in this very short period of time, relatively speaking, created these designs that are still with us today. And he did all of it based on this Maya principle. And so I'm gonna look it up real quick so I don't butcher it.
I mean,
But here's
sounds
the
like
here's, yeah.
A Don Draper.
Well, so here's what's interesting. I believe JFK hired him to come up with the aesthetics for the paint scheme for Air Force One.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah. Okay. Maya principle. Raymond Loewy. The Maya principle, coined by industrial designer Raymond Loewy, stands for most advanced yet acceptable. The Maya principle, MAYA. The Maya principle, emphasizing the importance of balancing innovation with user familiarity in design and product development. So this guy was so good at creating like this feeling of seeing things that are very like more that are different and more innovative, but never getting you the general public so far away from the core of whatever it was that you got lost, that it changed, it radically shifted so much.
Man, there's a lot of business lessons to unwrap right there.
So Loewy, so if you just look at the logo thing of Loewy, I'm going to tell you some of these because you can kind of see how innovative the guy was, right? He was like, hold on. Of course, I'm losing it now. Nabisco, United, BP, Shell, TWA, the United States Postal Service, Exxon, Lucky Strike, maybe Coca-Cola. I can't verify that one, but just I mean, these are Canada Dry. These are
Oh
just
yeah.
massive companies. And this guy was so brilliant in how he designed all this stuff. And he was doing all kinds of things like, I think I'm not mistaken, he did some work like in automobiles and like tried to apply his Maya principle to like automobile updates. And everybody wanted a piece of this guy because everything he created was like so amazing that the public just
Yeah.
fell in love with every design the guy ever had. And so maybe what you could say is that they've just continued to apply the Maya principle against what he created in the first place. Hence the shell logo has not really changed that much, slightly updated, but not significantly. I think about it on the Ferrari, for example, and, against that red, and it's the same look as it was in the 60s.
Yeah. It and it looks really good right now with
Yes.
Lewis Hamilton's yellow helmet accentuating it.
Yeah. I saw a hilarious photo. I don't know if you saw this. Some guy, I think on some subreddit or whatever, posted this, but it was a picture of Lewis Hamilton from like a profile shot with the helmet on in the red fire suit.
Hmm.
And somebody said, I can't believe that the Firestone Firehawk made it over to China for the race. Because the visor on the helmet looked like that goofy Firehawks, the Oakley looking, or the helmet.
Oh yeah. I I've got a picture of my two daughters with the
Okay.
Firehawk
Oh,
at
yeah.
actually at Indianapolis Motor Speedway a couple years ago. And I want to say we were at well, at the time it was the GMR Grand Prix. I think it's a Sancio Grand Prix now.
Yeah, right.
The race a couple weeks before the 500. It's Mother's Day
Yes.
weekend.
The GP.
We went to that. Yeah, they got to see the Firehawk, and then last year when we went to Gateway and then Milwaukee, they spotted him walking around, and I mean they still remembered from a couple years prior. It's funny the things that kids remember.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think either one of them could tell you a single thing about the race,
Right.
but they remember the Firehawk,
Yeah.
and they remember the fact that I bought them smoothies,
Of course. Yeah.
and
Food.
they got to sit in the grandstands and yeah, drink these, you know, way too big smoothies for them,
Right.
um, in the hot summer sun, and watch the race, and they remember that it was loud.
Yeah. So maybe this Maya principle is actually kind of interesting thing because I've got some theories about this most advanced yet acceptable concept.
Yeah,
I think it actually applies to a lot of different areas. I've spent probably way
I
too
I,
much time thinking about this, but
I was just thinking about that. Um, so as soon as you gave me the name of that acronym, there was a product that I recently evaluated,
mhm,
um, that definitely got the first two right.
okay,
The problem is they missed the last two.
yeah,
Like, very advanced. It could do 1,000 things,
mm,
but to really be able to utilize this platform, like I needed to learn how to do 1,000 things. And I didn't want to do 1,000 things with it. Like, I only
yeah,
wanted to do about 50 things with it. And none of those 50 things were super easy. So most advanced, it just wasn't really acceptable. And like the crazy thing is I was doing a one for one evaluation of this product versus something else. And the other product basically did, you know, 60, 70 things. And out of those 60 or 70, like 50 of them were the things that I needed.
right,
And you can imagine which one I bought.
right, right. Well, it's interesting. So if you take that Maya principle and you actually apply it to behavior, follow me on this one, see if this makes any sense.
Okay.
If you go into a conversation, let's say you're sitting there, you're in an office environment, you work someplace, and you got this idea about how to improve something, and you walk into a room and you're pitching this new idea to solve some problem. I don't know, pick I don't it can be anything. It can be as much some very mundane thing, right? Maybe that's even a better example. Everybody knows it's a problem. we can't solve it. It's such a pain in the neck. Nobody wants to put any attention to it. Or sometimes you argue, it's like, is the juice worth the squeeze? And you've thought it, you keep putting it off so long that it actually would have been if you've done something about it, but you pushed it off this far that you keep using it as like a rationalization for not doing it. Then the person comes in the room. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's tax season right now in the U.S. So I got a real good example.
Okay. So but somebody's sitting there going, they have an idea about how to solve it. So they walk into a room with some managers that actually can do something about this. But the idea is positioned as so radical, is so outside of norm, maybe is a better way to describe it, that it's not accepted because it's too advanced. You reach a tipping point where we're going to have to overhaul X, Y, and Z to make that work. And even though that might be a good idea the guy who comes up with the idea says, well, you need to overhaul X, Y, and Z anyways. That's another whole other set of problems we have. And he automatically gets dismissed because it's like, that's too big of a change. That's too complicated. There's too many things here. If the guy goes in using under the Maya principle to guide him, maybe introduces some change, but not the full change. And he incrementally builds or progressively builds to the full change through the use of momentum of success to get to his full vision of what can happen. And he brings people along with him. So eventually he does change out X, Y, and Z. He does bring about a massive change when you look at it holistically, but he brings them step by step incrementally through the change by solving maybe the biggest pain point first, which sets the stage for the next set of decisions that can come through and change. In our coaching work, we talk a lot about first order consequences and second order consequences. Easy to see the first order because it's the immediate impact from the decision. The second order consequences are the things that sometimes it's harder to see those, especially if you don't think through strategically what could potentially be happening, what could you face as a second order consequence to the first decision. So I think sometimes when we're looking at positioning something of change, for example, we should use this Maya principle, and we should also understand it in the context of first order consequences and second order consequences to build change through incremental progression, not trying to sell people on an entire solution where it's easier to say no.
Oh yeah.
Any thoughts about that?
I mean, I had not thought about it in that manner, but you're spot on. I mean, it's all too common to see people try to create change within an organization, and it's too much too fast. And yeah, people's defenses go up.
Mm-hmm.
They say, hey, because people automatically, they immediately go to these, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? Like, it's going to break all this and all this and all this. We're going to have to change it. And before you know it, there's a lot of objections that have come up, and they're real objections. They're not just stalls. There are excuses. Right. Like they are real rational reasons on why this isn't going to work. And yeah, like that incremental approach. I mean, that's typically more successful in just about any sort of org change. Like, just have a plan on how you're going to get to this end goal over a period of months or years, rather than just trying to snap your fingers and make everybody change, because you're going to meet a lot of resistance. And just the overall org change and adoption activity.
Yes.
Like, it's going to be much more difficult to get people on board and actually using your new solution or following your new process, because it's so unfamiliar.
Well, I would say for the first 5 years of my career, I mostly read sales and marketing books, even though I was in technology. So I'm a systems administrator. In the very beginning, a Windows systems administrator. That was my role. Mm-hmm. And while I'm doing that for my job, all I'm doing in my free time is read sales and marketing books. So somebody would say, why are you reading these books? Or what books are you reading? And I would say, oh, I'm reading this. They're like, what is that? You're not reading the latest book about something that has to do with technology or whatever it was. Or you're not reading a magazine or whatever. No, I'm reading this book. Why? And I said, because the way to be successful, to my view, this is a 23, 24-year-old me. I looked at it and said, the only way to ever accomplish things in this corporate environment that I find myself in, is for me to have ideas about how I can change things and make them better. And in order to get people to agree to something, I'm going to have to find ways to influence and persuade people.
Yeah.
So when I sat in meetings in the very beginning, I would watch salespeople come in from the outside selling hardware, software, services, whatever it would be. I'd watch them. And I'd watch these same decision makers that I reported up through these organizations make decisions based on these sales, their experiences as a customer with these salespeople. And I watched the successes that some of them had and the failures that some of them had. I go, I have the exact same problem. I'm just working on the inside of the organization, not coming from the outside. But I have the same situation. I have these same decision makers that I have to sell my ideas and concepts to do something internally that these folks are still selling to those people. So I watched the decision-making process, and I learned about sales and marketing by reading a lot and then by watching people do it, because I didn't have a job where I did that.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to implement these things inside with initiatives that I was pushing or change that I wanted to push or ideas or whatever it was. I started doing the exact same thing. So when I would get my opportunity to finally talk to a C-level executive, even though I was an employee of the company, I was an entrepreneur in the company, not an entrepreneur. I was an entrepreneur. I'm working in somebody's established environment and I'm selling them ideas. And I used all these techniques and things that I'd read about and just started putting them into practice, because I felt like, well, these decision makers are used to being sold to, sometimes in an effective way and sometimes in very ineffective ways. Let me find the effective ways to do this, and let me use these things to be able to try to drive something forward. I took that very simple approach. I just realized me to be happy in a corporate environment, I needed to be an entrepreneur. I needed to be pushing things and innovating and doing different things. And how was I going to get that done? Well, I had to be my own best cheerleader in advertising agency, where learn how to build decks, learn how to do things where I could present ideas. I had a teaching background, so I was comfortable in front of people, which helped me a lot. Be able to take these things and teach people. I felt like when I go to an executive team for a decision, I'm going to also teach them at the same time I'm sharing my idea with them, changing. I did exactly what we kind of talked about. I didn't know the Maya principle at the time, but I had this idea of building like incrementally or progressing to something bigger than what I had a vision for it. But I started out on level 1, even though I knew there were 10 levels to it. I started out by selling level 1. I found the least amount of resistance to change at level 1. It was enough that it was meaningful and impactful to change, but people weren't so resistant to it. If I shared 10 levels with my boss, they'd be like, that's crazy. Nobody's going to do all that because it's too radically different. There's too many people want to fight over what they already control. They're not going to change that.
Do you think that's why, there's a little bit of a leading question here, but do you think that's why it's so common to see salespeople rise to senior executive levels within organizations, because they know how to play that game?
Yeah. Because and this is a lot what we really sit down and talk to people about that we coach, is how do you understand the person or the people that you're sitting across the table from? Communication is one of the first big things. So while you can be listening, are you also observing? Are you listening to what they're saying? But more importantly, I'd say equally important, in some cases more importantly, are you paying attention? Are you observing how they're saying it?
Yeah.
So that when you start to speak and communicate with somebody, are you applying the golden rule or are you applying the platinum rule of communication? The golden rule would say, I'm going to communicate this person the way I want to be communicated to. The platinum rule of communication is, I'm going to communicate this person in a way that they want to be communicated to.
Yeah.
The observation then makes it much easier. So if you see very effective people that rise to these levels, they're more apt to be able to influence, persuade, communicate. There's oftentimes more charismatic, dynamic. They're energizing. People get excited. They can see the vision, right? They can see the possibilities of something. I would just suggest that if you employ like the Maya principle when you're trying to bring about the change, you see senior executives try this all the time. So even at a senior level situation, somebody will push something that's just a bit too radical of a change.
Mm-hmm.
And then watch everyone coalesce against them to resist the change. Oh, that's so-and-so's pet project. You can call it transformational 2.0, whatever you want, but I'm not in.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll actively try to take it apart.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. They try and submarine it as quickly as they possibly can.
Yes. And then whose team are you on? Are you on the change agents team? Are you on the resistance team? Then it gets really tribal. I'm not doing this because, and then the trick is, how do you not avoid getting labeled with any label, so that regardless of the regime change and the idea succeed and fail, you're abstracted one layer from it, so that way you can be supportive of anybody's ideas and execute against anybody's strategy. You're not so 1,000% invested in it that you can't extricate yourself from it if it doesn't work.
And the outcome of that power struggle, there's going to be one team or one tribe that is successful,
Sure.
and one that's not. And if you are part of the successful team or the successful tribe, that's going to be very beneficial to your career. There are probably going to be opportunities created coming out of your new pet project. And you're going to be one of the, as a supporter, one of the first on board for those opportunities. Or if you were a detractor, it could be the exact opposite.
But I think there's a way that you can be an intelligent detractor while you gain everybody's respect. And even if you end up on the losing side, for lack of a better way to describe it, good leaders that emerge through whatever the winning side is, if they know who you are, respect you, understand your intelligence, capabilities, your value, you may be useful in the sense that you can present an alternate perspective to something. And good leaders they don't want just yes people around them, right? They want sometimes people to have a different view. Again, I always looked at it like I could care less. I'm more interested in pushing my own ideas and building relationships and alliances to move things forward where I can move them forward. The times I did have to get engaged and be supportive of somebody else's vision or whatever they wanted to do, I always tried to maintain my existence in a way where I was dedicated and focused on it and trying to help it succeed. But I wasn't so married to it that I couldn't extricate myself from it if the time came. In other words, Matt's personality is not 100% tied up in this leader or this leader's vision and can't see other things. And you have to resist that temptation to just get into the group think mode where you just dive on people's teams and get so tribal with it, because you're right. Inevitably, somebody's going to lose, somebody's going to win, and somebody's going to lose.
Yep.
And if you want longevity someplace, you have to learn how to just demonstrate value where it's not so tight you can't extricate yourself from whatever is happening.
Yeah, you see this whole like winner and loser dynamic a lot of times when the cards start to get reshuffled at the executive level. You have a new CEO come in, or a new COO, or a lot of people on the board are kind of shuffling around, and you get this new vision and this new directive. And all of a sudden you see that these folks that were kind of aligned with this new executive, they oftentimes seem to get a lot of opportunities in the organization, and people that may have been aligned with someone that didn't get the CEO position or didn't get one of the other C-suite positions fall to the wayside a little bit. And it's because they've aligned themselves a little bit too closely with the losing side.
Yeah. And I don't know, have you ever been in one of those, have you ever been in the conversations where you're building orgs and you're slotting names in against
Yep.
like all the
Like
names
for
on the table and you're,
planning.
yeah.
Yep.
It's interesting what people say. I learned a lot sitting through a whole series of those types of situations over a number of years, where I really started to think a lot about what I believe in, and I believe in these concepts. I believe in this concept of advocates. So if you read certain sales books, you'll read about who's your internal champion, who's the person that can sell for you when you're not there.
Right.
Advocates function the same way, and inside organizations, advocates are so important. And it's important to understand that what kind of relationship you have with your advocate, and to educate your advocate as much as possible so that your advocate can speak for you when you're not there. So, and what are they saying about you? Is it aligned with who you are, what you care about, what your purpose is, so that when it comes to their representation of you or their influence in some situation where you're going to get slotted someplace, are they accurately depicting you and what your interests are, and do they understand your purpose, and can they articulate that to other people? Because that will have a lot of impact on potentially where you end up, and when it all settles and the dust settles, what chair did you end up in? Well, if people don't understand you, even if your advocates don't fully understand you, they'll just assume things about you. Well, I assume Nick needed to be in that job, or Matt wanted to be in that job. And it's like, actually, maybe Nick was ready to do something else, or Matt was ready to do something else. But because Nick and Matt didn't share that with their advocates just assumed something. And now the deck chairs are shuffled or whatever, and now we're all in new chairs, and it's like, well, I'm still in the same chair I didn't really want to be in. This isn't getting closer to what I actually want to do, but because I didn't share this with anybody, they didn't know. So there's multiple levels to this that we're talking about. So the idea behind all of this is the people that you work for, you want them to really understand who you are and what your true motivations are and your true purpose of why you're doing whatever you're doing. Because if you're just telling people what they want to hear, and you're in this mode of trying to placate everybody to either survive or to be positioned somehow, it really never works out. Because inevitably, especially in this day and age, there's always so much organizational change that goes around everybody, and everybody's subject to it, that inevitably it does come back to who's representing you, what do they know about you, how can they position you for success, and if they don't, or you've been telling them the wrong things, or trying to tell them what you think they want to hear, not what you really feel or think about something, you could be in a bad spot. And we know when we hit these inflection points, the trajectory that we sail off in can be very different, and that advocate can have a big impact on the trajectory you take from that point going forward. You think about it in that way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that the idea of having kind of this message around who you are and what you're about and what you like to do. As you were saying that, I thought about, actually, while you're kind of talking, I was thinking about a scenario that I was in a handful of years ago at an organization where, the cards got reshuffled. We had a couple people retire. Advocates kind of moved around, and there was one individual that I'm thinking of that, at least from where I was sitting, like if I was going to describe them as far as what they wanted to do in the organization and what they were about, they just wanted to advance into a new role.
Yeah.
Like they wanted to continue to climb the ladder. They were a climber. Which, I mean, that's not a bad thing per se, but that's about all I could say about them.
Right.
Sure. And then there was someone else who was in basically the exact same role at the time. If you were to ask me what this individual was about, I would say this person was all about solving hard data problems. Mm-hmm. He was a very data-driven individual. Like he wrote like articles and was a contributor in the data space, constantly talking data. Anytime that data was a part of a conversation around technology, he wanted to be in that conversation. Like that was what he was about. And not that many years later now, that person went from being a mid-level manager in the technology space to the chief data officer at that same company today. But again, if you were to ask them what this person was about, it was data and solving hard data problems. And now they're in exactly the type of role to solve the hardest data problems at that organization, because that's what they were about.
So what if somebody at the time, just think about in this context, what if somebody would have went to that individual with their own agenda and said, I really like you, John Doe, and I know you care a lot about data, but I really want you over in this area because you can be most effective over here, and I want you to do this job. And rather than just share what his feelings were, what if he said, okay, I'll move. Yeah, I'll go do that. This is where the misalignment emerges very quickly. So that person's passion around all that and that could be a lot of reasons why that person says yes and changes situations like that, right? And goes away from what they really care about. Maybe it's flattery. It could be an ego issue. It could be this feeling of, well, I want security and I want all this stuff. And so I'm pinning it to one other person or whatever I'm doing. So I'm going to sacrifice what I really care the most about. And I'm going to go do this. And again, first order consequences. Yes, it's seemingly good. I'm wanted. Somebody wants me for this job over here. Second order consequences. Now I'm removed from the path that I was on that I really care the most about. So this is why I think you always have to understand what's important to you, what your purpose behind all of this is, because it can really guide you and help you establish the criteria to make a decision, even if it's a hard decision. You're less likely to be misaligned if you understand that about yourself and you're telling people things that are authentic about you, not placating others or telling them what they want to hear, succumbing to your ego or whatever it might be, and look, he wouldn't be in a situation like that, right? He's probably not the chief data officer. If he sidetracks over here, and then you see this a lot with people and they're like, I deserve something. I deserve a promotion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to pursue it at all costs. They pursue it. They get off of the area where they're most effective to go pursue something because they need something. They need that thing. I need that title. They get away from what their core understanding was and what they really know, their core competency, and not for a title or a role or whatever it is. And then I've seen it over and over again. People get excised because they're not effective, because it's not aligned with what they understood and where they delivered the most value. It was a title and it was something they wanted and something they felt like they deserved. And so they went all in on it, pursued it, were much less effective in that role. And then they were, at the next time a riff came through, they were gone. They're not effective. Mm-hmm. They're not contributing. They're not successful. They're not helping us. That one decision moved them off that way rather than stay what they really cared the most about. But for these other reasons, right, they pursued it. That's why you really have to know yourself and have to you have to really understand yourself and what's important to you and not what other people are saying to you. Take that into consideration, but just consider what you want and what you're interested in, I think.
Man, this story hits home hard for me, or your example here. I basically did this in my career. A few years ago, I was in an area doing a job that I was really passionate about. And I felt like this was where I wanted to keep my career. Like the trajectory looked great. I was solving the problems that I wanted to solve. And I had an opportunity that was presented to me that it was a on paper advancement opportunity to go do something similar but different. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to be doing, and it wasn't something I was excited about, but I got sold on it.
Yeah.
As, hey, this is going to be an advancement opportunity for you. You're going to get a lot of exposure to different people that can be helpful for you later in your career. I would have never applied for that position independently. I was never excited about it. On day one, I wasn't excited about it. And then about a year and a half later, an opportunity came up for the role that I always wanted, that aligned 100% with my personal and career interest, that it was what I wanted to be doing all along. And I applied for it. I interviewed for it. And I got a call about a week after the interview from the hiring manager who said, you're a great candidate for this. But I wish that you had more experience in this space right now. The reason I didn't have more experience in that space was because I let myself get pulled away from it a year and a half prior.
Yeah.
If none of those things would have happened, I probably would have never got started on the path to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, right,
And
right.
I would, and I would have never came to the realization that if I really want to have 100% span of control over my own career, my own future, control my own destiny, then I have to be the one in the driver's seat. And so, I mean, that it was I guess what I'm getting at is it all worked out in the end. Like
Yeah,
things kind of, they oftentimes do. But if, if I didn't want to be an entrepreneur,
right.
if that wasn't something that had interested me, then that decision would have set me back, several years in my career.
So when I've talked to people that have had this kind of situation, part of what we're talking about as we explore people's backgrounds and experiences is to try to uncover things like that. Because what you find oftentimes is it did change the trajectory of something. And there just needs to be a realization that it changed the trajectory and why, what happened, and how to kind of break it down to understand it. And then oftentimes, right, the messaging that gets created out of it is valuable still, in the sense that you've discovered a lot. There's a lot of self-discovery in that process of understanding that, well, why did it happen? How did I get here? What did that mean to me? What does it mean in terms of relation to my existing career and what I'm doing or what I'm interested in doing? And how do I build good storytelling around that so I can share it with other people, so that when they evaluate me as a candidate and they ask me these inevitable questions about time, tell me about a time when something didn't work or something was hard. The way in which you are able to share these things with people are much more informed. They're much more insightful about who you are as a person, a candidate, and you can erase a lot of those losses by figuring this out and building that good messaging around it, and then sharing it with other people, because people like to understand. When people ask about those challenge questions or things that didn't work right, fine,
Mhm.
nobody was in that situation with the individual, so it doesn't mean anything as a direct impact or an understanding. But what it's doing is it's talking a lot about the person's capability to learn from something and grow, and the better you can articulate your growth from it, or what you did post situation, is what you're being evaluated against. Sometimes if it's very emotional, you still get hung up on the emotion, even if it's in a new employer with a new job interview or whatever it's happening, you're still emotionally. I just think it's best to take those things, break them down, where you take the
Mhm.
emotion out of it as much as possible, and you're just analyzing it. And then you're building your good messaging around it, so you can really articulate what it was to other people, so that they can experience it vicariously with you through your explanations, but they can also envision you then in their environment, where you will demonstrate and apply what you've learned through those situations. And so if they hire you, well, I know Nick's going to say yes to this opportunity because Nick explained to me how he evaluates opportunities through one that got away from him. So if
Mhm.
he's here and he wants this job, he's all in. He's dedicated.
Yeah.
He's focused on his job because it's really important to him and it aligns with him well. We don't have to worry about, is this a misaligned opportunity? Why? Because Nick demonstrated through our discussion that he had one that didn't work out, and he's not interested in that happening again, right? You see how you can turn these into positives?
Oh, absolutely. And people 100% ask those questions in interviews.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I I I had an interview a few years ago where the hiring manager, just flat out asked me. It was one of the last questions he asked. He said, "What's one of the biggest regrets in your career so far?" And he was looking for situations like that.
A story.
And
Yeah.
he wanted, and I actually, so I took a pause when he asked that, because that wasn't really a question that I was prepared to answer at the time.
Mhm.
It was a few years back. I wasn't as good at interviewing as at least I like to think I am today.
Right.
Um, and I asked him, can I have a moment to think about this? And if, almost any interviewer is going to tell you yes to
Right.
that question. Like,
Right.
in fact, most of them like for you to take a moment to think about the question.
Rather than just
Yeah.
start vomiting out non-response or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Just some nonsense that, is direct input from brain to mouth.
Yeah.
So yeah, I took a second, I thought about it, and I came back and I told him the situation, which for our listeners here. It was basically just that I waited so long to really take my career seriously in professional development. Like I was in I worked my way into leadership positions and a lot of advancement opportunities early in my career just because I was good at getting things done.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't doing a lot to actually develop myself professionally. Like in the back of my head, I had a little bit of success here and a little bit there, and all of a sudden I thought I had things figured out. And I was like, oh, I don't need all this. Like all this
Right.
professional development, somebody needs this, not me. And I didn't take things seriously. And all of a sudden, then I got into an environment where everyone was good. And the only person that was, if you stood all 10 of us that were in the same role against the wall, the only person that wasn't really focused on professional development was me. And guess whose career hit a brick wall? Mine. And so, and it took me a few years to figure that out. And so that was one of my big regrets, is that I didn't figure it out sooner, because I probably could have been a little bit further along in my career at the time if I had. And I mean, it's a lesson for anybody. Like, if you don't take your professional development seriously, and personal development too, which, I mean, those two
Sure.
things go, so they're very tied very closely to one another. Like the other folks that are in the room with you are, and eventually you're going to get passed on by. Now, that may be okay for you. You might be all right, in the seat that you're in. But if you're not, you've got to prioritize yourself.
Well, we have a lot of conversations, my wife and I do, with our clients about, you kind of look at it as a scale, and minimum is just surviving. I'm employed, I have a job, I'm doing work. That's like the minimum. The highest level is excellence and mastery. Most people are going to fall they're going to be in the middle area, that middle range somewhere, right? And the situation is that what we try to tell people is, if you just look at a handful of the most impactful things that you could change and identify what those are, to master those first, to get to excellence for those things, you're getting the most benefit from focusing on a limited number of things to change those. And so your professional development follows a path like this, where you're in this mode of just constantly focusing on 3 or 4 things, and then very specific things within those categories to go fix and go improve and go learn. And how you do that sometimes is formal training, education, it's reading, or whatever it is that you're doing to overcome a deficiency in that area, a perceived deficiency. It gets you closer to excellence. And deficiency could mean, I'm just middling right now and I want to be excellent. Okay. Well, if we just look at the whole thing as one big macro problem, not where I want to be in my career, it's very hard. That's like somebody on January 1st going, hey, I want to lose, 50 pounds by, the summertime. And it's just like, they get 2 weeks into it and they're not seeing they're not seeing the progress, and they go, I'm out. But if you started hitting sub targets and, secondary objectives in support of a primary objective that you're trying to, it's much easier to track your progress against. It's a lot like kind of we talked about earlier with introducing new ideas to change. To me, I'm all about elemental level and incremental change and incremental progress against something, the larger thing. It's just the way our brains work. And I think just human behavior, it's easier for most people to function that way. If they can stay accountable and on path and move against something, it's easier to hit the secondary objectives in support of the primary objective.